My fiancé is on a business trip, and I was suddenly stopped by my neighbor. He was staring at me intently. Can you keep your voice down? I stood there in shock and asked him, what do you mean? This community is not soundproof, every afternoon I can hear it, it's really annoying. After saying that, he casually pointed to the door behind me. But I haven't been here for half a year. I held the dress I had just found in my hands, frozen in place by the man's words in front of me. The spring sunlight was just right, yet I felt cold all over. I looked at him and asked again, what do you mean? He raised his head to look at me, and in his pitch-black pupils, a small version of me was reflected. Seeing that I really didn't understand, he patiently explained, these past few afternoons, your voice has been too loud. I have to work the night shift, it's really annoying. No matter how strong the desire is, I have to wait until the evening. This neighborhood really has no soundproofing, I can hear everything. I opened my mouth, but I didn't know what to say. Finally, clutching my skirt, I asked him, are you talking about me? He raised the corner of his lips and smiled, then pointed behind me, don't you live here? After saying that, he lowered his head and took out his phone from his loose pants. His bony fingers tapped and clicked, and finally, he found a photo and placed it in front of me. Is this your boyfriend? The photo is very blurry. The man has his back to the balcony, his upper body bare, holding a cigarette in one hand, exhaling smoke. There is no face, no symbolic objects. But I still recognized the person in the photo at a glance. My boyfriend. He is also my fiancé, and yesterday we were together discussing the wedding. Recently, with the wedding date approaching, Calvin has been especially busy these past few months, not only traveling for work but also managing our wedding arrangements. He left that day with a gentle kiss on the corner of my lips, stroking my head and saying, wait for me to come back, and we'll go get our marriage certificate first. I laughed at his eagerness, but couldn't help but smile. Before he went out, he jokingly said, don't think of me, think carefully about what to wear for the marriage certificate. I had already thought it through. I would wear the first dress he gave me. That dress was his birthday gift to me. When we first started our business, we were ridiculously poor, crammed into a rental apartment that had to be lit 24 hours a day. As soon as I got home from work, he would hug me first. He was covered in the smell of sweat and the greasy scent of the kitchen, and even with the lights on, the room looked dull and gray, making the exquisite gift box stand out even more. How much is it? This was my first sentence. At that time, he didn't say anything, just cut off the tag and urged me to try it on. I secretly checked the price, 5,800 yuan, and I felt a mix of crying and laughing for a long time. He saw me shedding tears and pointed to the large flat across from the rental apartment, saying, what is this? Don't cry, Wendy, one day I will buy you a big house. What he said has finally come true. On the day he moved in, he, who had never cried despite carrying millions in debt, held me and cried, Wendy, I finally lived up to you. The weather warmed up, and I rummaged through my wardrobe again and again, but that dress was nowhere to be found. After thinking it over, it must have been left in the rental apartment. Calvin still rented that apartment. He said, this is the place that witnessed our love. I took a taxi there, and in front of the community gate stood tall pine trees, just like before, unchanged in the slightest. I have walked this road no less than 1,000 times, easily arriving at the old rental house. I opened the door, and everything looked the same as before. The carpet at the entrance was still the one I found at the second-hand market, and the table was made by the two of us. Turning into the bedroom, I opened the wardrobe, and the dress was indeed hanging among a pile of clothes. At first, Calvin's career was just starting to take off, but he grandly said, don't bring anything, I'll buy you new things. I knew he cared for me and couldn't bear to hurt his pride, so when I left, I really didn't take anything. When he comes back, we should properly move house. At that moment, I looked at the photo, feeling cold all over, shivering and gritting my teeth as I replied, I haven't lived here for half a year. The man put away his phone, and his expression changed repeatedly. Finally, he uttered, my condolences. I pinched my hand to calm my emotions and took out my phone from my bag. After several unsuccessful attempts to unlock it, I finally put the phone away and looked at the man in front of me. Can you give me your contact information? His expression was unpredictable, wanting to say something but swallowing it back down. In the end, I don't know what she thought of. She turned around, took a gel pen, and wrote a string of numbers in my palm. Don't be upset, there are plenty of men in the world. The gel pen scratched my palm, making it itch. After he finished speaking, he said to me, if you need anything, find me. I didn't care why he would say such things to a stranger, and I hazily returned home. I lay in bed until evening, only then did I regain my senses. I raised my hand, the string of numbers in my palm signifying that this was not a dream. I followed the numbers to find his contact information. The nickname was the same as his name, Jason. I sent the first message, can you let me know when the male owner of the house comes back? The reply came back quickly, they just returned now. I stared at this sentence, lost in thought. I clicked into the chat box with Calvin, and the last message was still from him, I had dinner, Wendy, you need to remember to have dinner, I'll check. Then there was a picture of takeout on the desk. I edited and trimmed it down, and finally asked, where are you now? I waited for 2 minutes, but there was no response from the other side. I took a taxi directly to my old rental apartment. My heart felt tight, perhaps I had mistaken the person, perhaps there are indeed people in this world who have similar shapes and temperaments. All my excuses, all the steps I found for Calvin, shattered completely in front of the rental house door. The pair of shoes at the entrance was bought by me for him. Jason was leaning against the door with his phone in hand. When he saw me coming, he casually walked over to me, going inside? I can hear even better in my bedroom. Calvin, aren't you getting married? How do you have time to find me? Just a wall apart, the woman's sharp voice was heard clearly. It was the voice I had heard countless times, the last time. The woman seemed unhappy, pouting playfully, every time you say it's the last time, how can your wife be more comfortable than me? Calvin said nothing, and the woman's voice trembled as it climbed to another height. After a moment of silence, Calvin's voice came from the other side, the money will be transferred to your card, and we won't see each other again. I covered my mouth, nausea uncontrollably surged to my throat, and I stumbled to the bathroom, throwing up completely. My phone was outside, the beeping notification sounded, but I didn't go to check. It was the song that Calvin and I sang together back then. You know, even if the heavy rain turns the whole city upside down. The lyrics are particularly ironic at this moment. Jason knocked on the door at that moment, holding my phone. Answer? I didn't have time to speak and turned my head to vomit. The phone rang for more than 10 minutes, and the person next door seemed to realize something was wrong upon hearing the ringtone. The sound of knocking echoed, and it was the voice I was always familiar with. Is anyone there? Jason stood at the door, raising an eyebrow at me. I leaned against the toilet to stand up, staggering as I walked over to take the phone, switching it to silent. The knocking continued as I trembled and opened my phone. I immediately saw Calvin's reply, working overtime. Followed by a picture. The small desk lamp I gave him emitted a warm yellow light, softly illuminating the desk. Beside the documents was his hand wearing a wedding ring. Seeing this photo, my mind was in a roar, too stunned to think, just standing there in a daze. The knocking continued, and his voice rang out at the door again, tinged with a hint of impatience. Is anyone there? My thoughts returned. I am not a magnanimous person. At this moment, I wish I could rush out the door and slap him hard, and I wish I could drag that woman next door out too, making it known to everyone. These images flashed quickly through my mind. But then what? I wasted 6 years of my youth, accompanying Calvin from a poor boy to where he is now. People would later smile at each other when mentioning this matter, saying that Calvin was quite the charmer. What about me? Am I really deserving of all this? I am unwilling to just turn the page like this. I pinched the palm of my hand hard, forcing myself to control my emotions, shaking my head, wanting to speak but finding that no sound would come out. I opened the memo, breathing heavily as I controlled my trembling fingers to type, "Help me get through this." I squatted at the bathroom door, watching him walk out with his phone raised. He opened the door while on the phone. "Sorry, my wife is calling me." "Is there something?" There was silence outside for a while, as Calvin was always cautious. I gritted my teeth and scrolled back through our previous chat records, copied and pasted back to him, "It's so hard, go to bed early." I made sure my tone was just like usual. A notification pinged from my phone outside the door. Calvin's voice then sounded, "Sorry to interrupt." I heard this ringing sound and felt like crying and laughing at the same time. It's really strange. He loves me so much that he can pay attention to my messages at any time, remembers that I want to drink warm water every morning, and even handles the cat hair stuck to me with ease, despite being slightly allergic to it. He clearly loves me in so many details, so why does he have to cheat? Jason came back quickly, and he was quite calm, even able to joke, "You scared me to death." Just now, when he suddenly stopped talking, I thought I was found out. Just a wall apart, the woman's sharp voice almost simultaneously rang out, "Your wife must be at home right now, who has nothing to do to come here." Calvin lowered his voice. I couldn't hear him, only the woman's words came one after another. "It's happened so many times, when have you ever been caught? You enjoy yourself and then don't recognize me? Money? You use money to send me away." There was a lot of noise over there, and finally, there was a loud bang. I guess it should be the night light on the bedside table. The only time Calvin got angry with me was because I sneaked out to drink with a partner for a project. He trembled his lips after knowing, fiercely smashing the bedside lamp. In the end, he squatted down, holding his head, and began to cry. That nightlight has already been dropped once. If it falls again, it should be completely broken. Jason looked at me, wanting to comfort me, his lips moving as he spoke, and finally he talked about himself. "I've also encountered the wrong people." I stood up and walked to the balcony. He followed behind me, still lazy, leaning on the balcony and, "Look ahead." I stood on the balcony, looking at the neighboring balcony. It was late at night, and apart from the occasional honking of passing vehicles, there was no other sound. I will clearly unfold the question that has been circling in my heart and analyze it thoroughly. How many times did he deceive me without my knowledge? When I wonder if his business trip went smoothly, how many times has he actually been on a business trip? The photos he sent me, the daily life he shared with me, which ones are real and which ones are fake? This place he calls a witness to our love, how many times has he cheated? That bed sheet is the one I chose, the one I washed. Will they dirty my bed sheet? Will he also give that girl a 3,500 dress in this room? Jason stood beside me, calling my name, indistinct, like a whisper between lovers, "Wendy." When I turned my head, he said it again, "Look ahead." His eyes were too bright, it felt like I had seen him somewhere before. But the matter at hand has occupied all my thoughts, and I don't want to get tangled up in these. I came to the balcony not to seek an end, and after regaining my senses, I only stared blankly and asked him one last question: "How long have they been together?" He said that since moving here for half a year, he has been able to hear unreserved sounds from time to time during this period. Half a year, just the right time when Calvin proposed to me. I lowered my head and smiled. Seeing me like this, Jason straightened up and began to persuade me. "I'm a tour guide, if it really doesn't work, why not join our group and go out to relax a bit?" It's absurd. At that moment when he said this, I instinctively felt that he was trying to use me to boost his performance. No need. I touched the wedding ring on my middle finger. He looked at my actions with disappointment. "Don't be so love-brained, my sister used to be like that, I'm all too familiar with it. Even if you meet the wrong person, you can't just throw yourself at them, right? Life is still long." I turned my head to look at him. He had a kind and earnest expression as he advised me. It was already quite difficult for a stranger to go this far. I opened the bag I carried with me, pulled out a stack of cash, and placed it on the balcony table. He pressed his lips together. "What does this mean?" "It means we're square. But I also sincerely thank you, thank you." Jason suddenly laughed, his dark eyes like two pieces of obsidian. His long fingers rested on the table, pinching a few $100 bills. With a brilliant smile hanging on, I started counting one by one. In the end, I counted 5. I placed the rest on the table and turned around to wave at me. I looked at the few bills left on the table, and his voice fell into my ears, "Let's go, it's settled." After returning home and calming down, everything actually has a trace to follow. Clearly, the previous photo was of a hotel table, so how did the next picture turn into a company desk? It's just that I trusted him too much. I never bothered to pay attention to these small details. I put that dress in the deepest part of the wardrobe and asked Calvin, "When will you be back?" He almost replied instantly, "Wendy, you're not asleep yet." "Tomorrow, I stayed up late to finish my work, and I will go back tomorrow." I didn't reply to him, just curled up on the sofa, looking at these years' photos over and over again. From the lush campus to the bustling city, from the dilapidated rental house behind us to the spacious apartment, the photos become clearer, but the Calvin in my memories grows more and more blurred. I remember when he confessed with abandon and flair, "Wendy, follow me, I won't let you suffer." Now, he has been tempered by society, becoming gentler and more suave. I sulked on the sofa and sent over the selected wedding venue. He replied instantly with a playful emoji. "We definitely have to split up. However, I must take something with me, that would be fair." Calvin knew my situation, and when he proposed, he said, "Wendy, in the future I will give you a lot of love and a lot of money." In the past, love was like money, half and half. Now, love is gone, and what is lacking must be filled with money. It wasn't difficult to find that woman. In less than half an hour, she had investigated their past thoroughly. "It's just business," a boss sent someone to Calvin. After a few exchanges, he didn't refuse and secretly kept them around as a plaything. The woman's name is Vivian, and there isn't much of a problem, just one little thing. She has dated many boyfriends, most of whom are rich second generation. Calvin probably just saw this point and thought it would be easy to break up. After going back and forth, I added her as a friend using a different account. The verification message was just one sentence, "Do you want to marry Calvin?" She agreed very quickly, and I said, "I promise you can marry him." On the other end, she replied with a question mark, but I didn't respond to her anymore. The next day, when Calvin came back, he reached out his hand as usual, waiting for me to hug him. I sat on the sofa, staring at him intently, and he sensed something was off and withdrew his hand. He quickly walked up to me and asked softly, "What's wrong?" "Wendy." I didn't look at him, just lowered my head and stared at the carpet on the floor. Unlike the cheap carpet in our rental, he knew I didn't like to wear shoes at home, so he carefully selected the best and personally laid it throughout the entire house. I feel sorry for him. He straightened up, beads of sweat on his forehead, and said, "You laid it out before, so of course it's my turn now." After a long while, I gathered my emotions before speaking, my voice choked. "Have you ever done anything to hurt me?" Calvin almost immediately knelt on the ground, his tone panicked. "Wendy, did someone say something unpleasant to you? In all these years, when we've been drinking and discussing business, when have I not informed you?" "No, I haven't even once." "Do you believe me?" he said, trembling as he reached out to touch my face, his tone so humble it was like dust. "Wendy, I love you the most." I couldn't help but sneer. He really is something, able to say he loves me the most while comfortably entangled with another woman. I carefully observed his expression. At that moment, he spoke lies without batting an eye. The boy who gave me the dress, who deceived me by saying that even 50 yuan made him so anxious he didn't know what to do, seems to have suddenly disappeared into the river of time. He held my hand tightly, his forehead beaded with cold sweat. Before he spoke again, I withdrew my hand and casually said, "I was just joking." He didn't relax. Instead, he looked at me seriously. "Wendy, this joke isn't funny." He was serious, so I was serious too. I smiled and looked at him, asking, "Have you ever done anything to wrong me?" He answered firmly, "No." The next moment, he awkwardly changed the subject. Let's not talk about that anymore. Come and take a look at the wedding. Do you have any suggestions? He naturally handed his phone to me, flipping through the dozens of wedding plans he had saved. I took a glance and said, make it bigger, let's invite all the relatives. He knew that my relationship with my family was not good, and he looked up in surprise. I thought you liked them smaller. That was in the past. Maybe it really is over, or perhaps my words made Calvin wary. During this time, he suddenly didn't have to fly around for business trips anymore, and he wanted to be at home for almost 24 hours a day. He returned to the appearance of the good man he used to be. Every time I got off work, the first thing he did was hug me, as if we had returned to the days when we lived in that rented room. Invitations were sent out one after another, and Calvin smiled as he invited both familiar and unfamiliar people to attend our wedding. Perhaps it was guilt, perhaps it was genuine happiness. Gifts arrived one after another in my hands. Within 2 days, everyone knew how much Calvin spoiled me. I accepted with a faint smile, and when the time was right, I even added, of course, it hasn't been easy for us to come this far in college. I dragged Calvin shopping, as if to make up for the regret of not having time together before. But I didn't expect that, around a corner, we would run into Vivian. The face was unfamiliar, but the voice was familiar. She linked her arm with the person next to her and playfully said, buy me a bag. The person beside her replied, okay. The four of us collided head-on, and Calvin's body stiffened for a moment. I gave the man Vivian was holding on to a glance, and he casually pushed her into Calvin. Calvin's coffee spilled all over both of them. Before we could say anything, she spoke first. Her voice was soft, her head lowered. I'm sorry, Calvin. Calvin held my hand tighter. I smiled at him. Do you know him? He lowered his head and seriously explained to me, an intern from my previous company. I let out a sound of surprise, not caring at all why a mere intern would be remembered by him. She hurriedly took out a piece of paper and began to wipe the dirt off Calvin. Before Calvin could take a step back, she spoke up, how about I go buy you a new outfit? Calvin declined, but Vivian, with red eyes, looked as if she wouldn't take no for an answer. I really couldn't connect the person in front of me with the voice I had overheard that day in the rental apartment, so I looked at her a couple more times. She looked up at me and smiled, then said, Wendy, come with me. I just don't know what to choose. I immediately agreed and lifted my foot to leave. Calvin grabbed my wrist, looking understanding, then let's go pick some together. The store is very large, and I was dazzled by the selection of suit fabrics while following the sales assistant. When I turned around, Calvin and Vivian were already gone. I politely told the sales assistant that I wanted to browse, and the male companion that Vivian brought walked up to me. He called me, Sister Wendy. Sister Su Ling asked me to follow you. What should I do next? With money, you can do anything. He might be on the job for the first time, clearly inexperienced. I touched a piece of black wool suit fabric and suddenly thought of those pitch black eyes. In the blink of an eye, a scene suddenly flashed through my mind. He was holding an umbrella, the girl beside him was crying incessantly, and her eyes looked up at me through the rain curtain. I think I probably remember when I saw him. The boy was obviously nervous and asked me again, Sister Wendy, what should I do? I finally came to my senses and said to him, guide Vivian to spend money, the more the better. She owes a huge amount, and your task will be complete. He looked obviously stunned. What should I do then? I called the sales assistant to bring the fabric, then turned to the dazed boy and said, I'm paying you, so this should be what you're thinking about. Calvin changed into a suit and came out. I walked over and circled around him, praising him, it looks really good. Vivian appeared, and I deliberately ignored the ambiguous atmosphere between the two of them. I looked up at Calvin, how about you wear this on the wedding day? His expression stiffened for a moment, then he patted my head, always joking. Until he got home, the expression on his face had not relaxed in the slightest. He seemed to want to say something to me but hesitated. During the last dinner, he finally spoke up. With a serious expression, Wendy, I heard that intern's personal life isn't very good. I tilted my head in confusion. He continued, "It's just that she has a lot of boyfriends." I retorted, "What does her private life have to do with me?" He explained, "I'm just telling you not to get too close to her." It's truly laughable, he was the one entangled with others, and now he is the one who despises them. As the wedding date approached, he remembered that I had practiced calligraphy and insisted that I write the wedding invitations. After finishing each person's name, he would pick up the invitation and ask me if I still remembered that person. There are our university classmates, his high school classmates, and various relatives. He told me about them one by one. I held the brush and wrote down one name after another. Halfway through, his phone rang. He paused for a moment, unsure of what he was remembering, but in the end, he still answered the call. At the same time, my phone rang. After I answered, a boy's clear voice came through, "Sister Wendy, the task is complete, I'm out." I casually replied, I heard Calvin's impatient voice rise. I said, "Don't bother me." Without looking up, I asked him, "Difficult client?" He hummed in response. There was a moment of confusion on the other end of the phone, and only then did I say to him, "Tomorrow, the fees will be transferred to your card, looking forward to a pleasant cooperation." Calvin saw that I was in a good mood and asked me, "Was the collaboration very successful?" I nodded at him and continued writing the invitations according to the list. Finally, he put down his phone, looked at me and said, "There's something at the company, Wendy, I need to take care of." He didn't wait for my response and turned to leave. I took a wedding invitation and neatly wrote Jason's name on it. The groom's name had already been written as Calvin. In the bride's section, I wrote, "Vivian," in a flourish. I changed my account to a secondary one and saw Vivian's urgency clearly. She sent a series of messages, "Who are you? Wendy? I don't need to marry Calvin, I have a boyfriend. My boyfriend treats me well. Why should I trust you?" After that, there was a long silence. Yesterday, she sent the last message, "What should I do? Who I am is no longer important. What matters is that I understand the filth between them, and I know that her best choice at this moment is to marry Calvin. Because she owes a huge debt and urgently needs a big spender. I know Calvin is with her, so I simply replied, "Have a child first." I thought for a moment and added, "It doesn't matter whose it is." Until the evening, Calvin still hadn't returned. Jason's call came through, filled with complaints, a brief sentence, "The noise from next door has started up again." I ignored him and asked, "Did you receive the invitation?" He said, "I received it." "That piece of suit fabric?" "I received it too." "I'm satisfied, now we're even." At that time, I had just started college and still had a sense of childishness about me. That day, as I was bringing lunch back to the dorm, I saw a girl being pulled along by a man holding an umbrella from a distance. The rain was heavy, and it was hard to tell whether the water on the girl's face was rain or tears. I was instantly filled with anger and threw the lunch I was holding at the man's chest. "Let her go." It was at that moment that he raised his eyes and looked at me through the rain. Later, I found out it was a misunderstanding. That girl was his sister, and he was forcefully trying to take her home because she was so distraught over a scumbag. It has been 6 years since this happened, a long time indeed, and I never expected to see him again. I truly don't remember. But the person on the other end of the phone seemed to chuckle softly. Calvin's unbearable voice came through the microphone to my side, but I could only hear his voice. He said, "Wendy, do you think this settles everything? Otherwise?" He had his own pride, and in the end, he just replied sullenly, "You think for yourself." It wasn't until the early hours of the next day that Calvin hurried back. He saw me turn over and approached, apologizing shyly, "Did I wake you?" He said he wanted to bend down and kiss me, and I covered my mouth and nose, complaining, "You smell strange, go take a shower." He straightened up and hurried to the bathroom. Vivian's message also came through, "So what?" I replied to her while lying on the bed, "On the day Calvin gets married, wear your wedding dress, and I'll come to pick you up." She must have guessed who I was, but she had no other choice. Just a second before Calvin stepped out of the bathroom, I sent her, "Send me a few of your intimate photos." Calvin lay down on the bed and reminded me, "Don't look at your phone, you can still sleep a little longer." I looked at the photos that were sent to me and got up to reply to him, "I can't sleep, I'm going to check the wedding guest list." He carefully reminded me not to stay up too late. I went into the study, turned the photos into a video, and copied it onto a USB drive. Vivian's message also came, "Are you sure I can marry in?" "Sure. The bride at the wedding is you." Finally, the day of the wedding arrived, and Calvin took me to the hotel. Before we left, he repeatedly asked me, "Wendy, do you want to marry me? Will the wedding proceed as planned? Can I get married smoothly?" As I looked at the bouquet for the wedding, I answered him while picking out questions, "Of course it can be held smoothly." He had just left when I brought Vivian over. She looked at me without the slightest surprise, but instead covered her belly, "I'm pregnant." I ignored her hostility and simply told her this was the only chance. She asked, "Why do you want to help me? Is this helping her?" She had no power or influence, publicly putting Calvin's family in a difficult position, threatening to marry Calvin with an unclear child, who knows what would happen after the marriage. But since she said that, I adjusted the payment code in front of her, not much, 200,000. I took her money and sent her off in the wedding car. After putting on my mask, I took a taxi to the wedding venue. When I arrived, the wedding car had not yet arrived. The staff had everything ready early in the morning. They already knew this was not an ordinary wedding banquet and consciously made room for me. I deleted the original document and put in the video I made. After doing all this, Jason's voice sounded beside me, "I'm leaving tomorrow, are you really not considering joining my tour group?" I said, "Let's talk about it later." Then he lowered his head to observe the situation in the hall. He lazily leaned against the side and casually said while watching my focused movements, "All right then, I'll rest for a couple more days." I didn't have time to say much when my phone suddenly rang. It was Calvin. I answered, and he said, "Wendy, I know you've been feeling off lately. After today, let's live well, okay?" It turns out he wasn't completely oblivious. At this moment, the wedding car should have arrived outside the hall. I saw many people gathered at the door. I saw Calvin coming out, holding his phone, hurriedly walking towards the entrance. When I looked again, he had already hung up the phone and was helping Vivian out. Through the thick veil, Vivian bent her head again, and for a moment, no one noticed anything amiss. I watched this farce, as if I were watching the 6 years of my life rush by. This farce reached its peak when Calvin dropped the engagement ring. "How could it be you?" He seemed unable to accept it, shaking her body and asking her, "Where's Wendy?" As his words fell, I pressed the play button. The video that was originally meant to express the deep feelings between Calvin and me was replaced by him and Vivian. In that familiar rental room, they were saying disgusting things. The audience was in an uproar. No one expected that Calvin, who loved his partner so much, was this kind of person. Many people were invited, even 2 or 3 reporters, and this time Calvin's reputation was truly tarnished. Calvin's parents came on stage and gave him a hard slap. On the contrary, my parents kept circling around Calvin, asking him how he was and showing concern. He suddenly looked up at me, perhaps recognizing me, and wanted to step over here, but the next second, Vivian hugged his leg. "I am pregnant." I saw Calvin's usually gentle face crack inch by inch, and he bent down to say something to her. She shook her head repeatedly, and finally, she went to Calvin's parents, bowing one after another. Calvin abandoned the mess behind him and stubbornly walked towards me. He stood about a meter away and spoke, "Wendy, do you already know?" I didn't speak, and he continued, "At that time, I always felt that being with you was wonderful, but I have grown old, I am no longer that 18-year-old boy. In the face of those temptations, once or twice is manageable, but what about 100 times, 1,000 times? I really can't control it." He paused for a moment and then said, "Do you remember those romance novels you asked me to read? The stories always end with the childhood sweethearts getting married, and then what? He continued to speak to himself, then it turns into the next female lead's cheating dad or divorced mom. I have a good temper, but that doesn't mean I don't have a temper. After all these years, have I never encountered situations that provoked me? Have I never faced temptation? Didn't the bosses he worked with also have happy and fulfilling families? Do all novel endings just abruptly stop at marriage? Ultimately, it's just that he has money now, thinks I can't live without him, and doesn't want to control me anymore. An affair, spoken of so refreshingly and uniquely. I looked at him and said, "Stop pushing me, you can't elevate a mere affair to a spiritual level." As soon as I finished my sentence, Jason leaned against the side and chuckled softly. Calvin looked at him, then at me. Jason took out his phone and showed him the photos he had taken of himself bringing different women into the house. Don't get me wrong, I'm your neighbor, kept awake by your noise, and came specifically to watch the show. I put these photos up on the big screen. Vivian hurried over and tugged at his sleeve. She had already changed her words. Mom and Dad are calling you. Calvin's parents like children and have hinted to me more than once to have kids early. Vivian is pregnant, and they should be more delighted than surprised. Everyone knows that Vivian is pregnant, and Calvin has always cared about his image. Under the pressure of public opinion, he will definitely marry Vivian. I dropped the last sentence, happy wedding. He can no longer be happy. Calls keep coming to my phone, and the partner we had originally agreed to cooperate with wants to terminate the contract, asking me what to do. This is the perfect time to make a fortune. I own a small share of the company, but it's far from enough. With the money Calvin has saved over the years and the betrothal gifts, I'll buy as many shares as I can. I have never interfered in the company's affairs, keeping a low profile. After the storm passed, I unexpectedly became the largest shareholder of the company. I sold all the shares I had under my name. Calvin called again after knowing, and after a long pause, he didn't say anything. His tone was irritated. Wendy, what exactly do you want to do? You understand the accounts, all my money is with you, isn't that enough? He brought up that dress again. Wendy, do you remember that dress? You loved it for so many years, you have always been so devoted, why would you betray me now? I answered seriously, that dress? It's in the wardrobe, you can go look for it yourself. Calvin didn't know when I took the dress back, he just pulled out a bunch of torn fabric. Vivian posted various essays online to clear her name, saying that the two of them had actually known each other for a long time, and that I was the one who intruded, both openly and subtly. Some people believed her, while others did not. There are always some ignorant people who curse me, so I started a live stream to promote my new company. When the heat dies down, I'll go live to write a rebuttal to Vivian's document. When the heat is good, I'll sell products. A clarification document took 3 months to finish dragging it out. Those who criticized me at the beginning still criticize me as usual, only now their nicknames are followed by having placed orders 5 times, 3 times. The fact that Vivian has had many boyfriends is like a thorn stuck in Calvin's heart, and I gradually listed the timeline of Vivian's relationships. Many people noticed that Vivian found Calvin on the same day she broke up with her ex-boyfriend. The online discourse spread widely, and many people exchanged knowing smiles upon seeing that Vivian was pregnant. But Calvin is a person with a strong mental fortitude, so I personally called him. I said decisively, the child in Vivian's belly is not yours. He didn't say anything, and the sharp, thin voice of the woman came through the phone to me. You don't believe me? I've been following you for so long. He asked me amidst the noisy background, how did you know? I replied, did you forget what medicine is in your vitamin bottle? We have always been using contraception. He is afraid of harming my body, so he has been taking the birth control pills. Those pills have always been kept in a vitamin bottle. He spoke excitedly, but I've already switched back. I didn't say anything, and he seemed to think of something, then hung up the phone. Not long after, someone uploaded a video. The background was a hospital, with Vivian clutching her stomach and refusing to leave, while Calvin forcefully pulled her inside. Once the video was released, more people online condemned Calvin. Soon, Calvin called and said, "You changed my medication without permission, and you will be legally responsible." I was surprised. "What are you talking about? I never engage in such illegal behavior." Calvin rushed upstairs, opened the bottle of vitamins, and it was really just ordinary vitamins. Vivian didn't stay in the hospital, sitting on the sofa crying. He felt annoyed. "Why didn't you say it was my child?" "I said it, but you didn't believe me." It was his overconfidence, thinking that Wendy wouldn't deceive him, that made him lose his mind amidst the series of events. The matter of Vivian's debt dealt him a second blow. He looked at the astronomical figures on the IOU and asked, "Where's the money?" Vivian replied, "Investing." Nowadays the company is in chaos, and he can't even protect himself. He can't repay this money. But Vivian tightly hugged his leg, calling out to him one after another, "Husband." In the end, Calvin agreed to pay the money in installments. My new company is thriving because of live streaming, and those who were the harshest critics at the beginning have instead become our most loyal fans. I dare to take Calvin's business. I can't say take, I have actually collaborated with them before, and they are just choosing the best, that's all. The more times I snatch, the more likely I am to run into Calvin. He has dark circles under his eyes and strides towards me, asking, "What exactly do you want to do?" I look at his obviously aged appearance and reply, "Fair competition." Calvin's company was already a strong bow, and many were waiting to acquire it. The company he had worked hard to build ultimately changed hands. The person who bought my shares is more ruthless than I am, gradually undermining his power, but not allowing him to step down from the position of general manager. The employees still call him Calvin, but in reality, he has no power at all. The things he cared about the most, career, family, children, he ended up losing all of them. Not once have I seen his car parked outside my door, and then Vivian appeared before me. "Miss Wendy, you should talk to Calvin." What should I advise him? "You all should stay away from me." I tidied up the house and threw all of Calvin's things out. I searched high and low for a notebook, and finally slapped my forehead, realizing it must be in the rental apartment. I took a taxi back to the rental apartment again. It was still the familiar road. Last time I was filled with anxiety and unease, but this time I felt completely relaxed. I opened the door, and everything seemed familiar again. I gently walked around the nightlight lying on the carpet and indeed found that notebook on the bookshelf. This is the scrapbook I made for myself, where I recorded all the significant events: getting into college, falling in love, graduating, starting a business, and so on. I turned to the last page and gently wrote, June 10th, the beginning of a new life.